In 1492, Spain was a poor kingdom at the edge of Europe. By 1550, they possessed more gold and silver than any empire in human history. Every month, ships laden with treasures from America arrived in Seville. There was literally an unlimited influx of wealth. They should have been the richest, most powerful nation in the world. But in 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy, and they repeated it in 1575, 1586, 1607, 1627, and 1647. They went bankrupt 7 times in 150 years. The richest empire in history couldn't pay its bills. And here's the terrifying thing. The very same mechanism that destroyed Spain is happening in America right now. Even though they are different centuries, it's the same kind of suicide. At the end of this video, you will see exactly how an empire is drowning in money. Let me show you how it happens, because once you understand this, you will never look at the economy the same way again. The year is 1492. Christopher Columbus sails west, searching for a route to India. He doesn't find India. He finds something far more valuable, the American continent. And the Spaniards immediately realize that these continents are covered in unimaginable amounts of gold and silver. Within 30 years, Spanish conquerors conquer the Aztec and Inca empires. They seize control of the silver mines at Potosí, now located in Bolivia. And these are no ordinary mines. Potosí was the richest silver deposit ever discovered. At its peak, it produced 60% of all the silver in the world, a mountain, 60% of global silver. Spanish galleons begin crossing the Atlantic, laden with treasures. More and more gold and silver flow into Spain each year. We're talking about 150 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver shipped to Spain between 1500 and 1650. That's more precious metal than existed in all of Europe before Columbus sailed. Spain became incredibly rich overnight. The Spanish crown amassed 20% of the royal treasury. King Charles V had more money than any monarch in European history. He could afford the largest army, the largest navy, palaces, wars, anything he wanted. Spain was a superpower. Everyone feared them. And do you know what Spain did with all that wealth? They destroyed themselves with it. Let me show you how. What you need to understand is this. Wealth isn't just about having gold. Wealth is about production. It's about producing the things people want. Food, clothing, tools, technology, real goods and services. Gold is just a way to store and trade that productive capacity. Spain forgot about it. They stopped production. Why would anyone work in a Spanish factory when they could import everything with American gold? Why would anyone farm on Spanish soil when they could buy grain from other countries? Spanish industries collapsed because they couldn't compete with the cheap imports bought with the treasury. The Spanish economy was hollowed out. They became dependent on foreign goods. Dutch merchants, French farmers, Italian bankers. Everyone was producing. Spain was only buying. And here's the fatal part. All that gold and silver, it didn't stay in Spain. It flowed out again to pay for imports. But things got even worse, because Spain had the largest army in Europe. They were constantly at war. The Netherlands, France, England, the Ottomans. War everywhere. And wars are expensive. Really expensive. Even all that American silver wasn't enough. King Philip II was spending twice as much as he earned, even with his treasury fleets. So what did he do? He borrowed huge amounts from Italian and German bankers. He promised to repay it with future silver shipments. Bankers were happy to lend because Spain had silver mines, right? Guaranteed collateral. But there wasn't enough silver. Spain's military spending was constantly increasing. More war, more cost. And that's where the financial suicide begins. Spain started devaluing its currency. They would take the silver coins, melt them down, mix them with copper, and mint more money. Suddenly, they had more money to pay the army. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Merchants immediately realized this. There was less silver in the coins, so they raised prices. If you're getting paid in a diluted currency, you charge more for your goods. Basic economics. Inflation exploded in Spain. Prices quadrupled in the 1500s. The Spanish called it the price revolution. In reality, it was the destruction of the currency. And here's what makes it so dark and fascinating. Spain had more gold and silver flowing in than any nation in history, and yet they suffered from inflation. How? Because they devalued their own currency faster than the treasury arrived. They destroyed the value of money faster than they could have imported real wealth. Spanish soldiers began receiving their salaries in worthless currency. Their wages were insufficient to buy food. Therefore, they revolted. The Spanish army, once the most feared army in Europe, began to disintegrate. Soldiers refused to fight unless they were paid in real silver, not worthless copper coins. Some units deserted the battlefield. In 1576, Spanish soldiers revolted in Antwerp. They hadn't received their salaries for months. They plundered the entire city, killing 8,000 civilians. This wasn't an enemy attack. It was Spain's own army destroying Spanish land because they weren't receiving real money. That's the effect the collapse of the currency has on an army. Meanwhile, Spain's debt continued to grow. Philip II took on more and more debt. By 1557, he owed so much to Italian bankers that he couldn't make payments, so he declared bankruptcy. He refused to pay. The Spanish government literally said, "We're not paying our debts, deal with it." You'd think this would stop lending, right? But it didn't, because Spain still had silver mines. The bankers thought, okay, this is a temporary problem. Next year's treasury fleet will fix everything. So they restructured the debt and kept lending. Spain went bankrupt again in 1575, and again in 1596, and in 1607, and in 1627, and in 1647, 7 times. In 150 years, each time they restructured, promised to pay, then defaulted again when the money ran out. It became a cycle. Borrow, default, restructure, borrow, default. And each time they defaulted, the cost of borrowing increased. Interest rates went up and up. In the 1600s, Spain was paying 40% interest on loans. 40%, because everyone knew Spain would probably default again. But still, they lent money because of those silver mines. Here's the unbelievable part. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported approximately 180 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver from America. In today's money, that's more than $3 trillion worth of precious metals. $3 trillion. And they went bankrupt 7 times. So where did the money go? To military spending. Spain fought the Dutch for 80 years. They fought France. They fought England. Wars consume wealth faster than mines can produce it. While importing $3 trillion worth of treasure, they spent the equivalent of $4 trillion on wars. The math doesn't add up. It never did. By 1650, Spain was a shadow of its former glory. Treasury fleets were still arriving, but the money was immediately going to debt repayments and military expenses. The Spanish economy had collapsed. They were producing almost nothing. They were importing everything. And despite possessing the world's richest colonies, they were drowning in debt. Now let me show you why this matters to you. Because America is doing exactly the same thing. Different mechanism, same result. America doesn't have silver mines, but they have something better. They have the dollar, the global reserve currency. Everyone uses the dollar in international trade. Everyone holds dollars as reserves. The dollar is backed by nothing but trust and military power. Spain had silver, America has the printing press. And just like Spain, America has massive military commitments. Over 750 military bases in 80 countries, an annual defense budget of $837 billion. Wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, proxy wars everywhere. Spain fought in the Netherlands for 80 years. America has been in the Middle East for over 20 years. The same pattern. And just like Spain, America is borrowing to pay it off. National debt of $35 trillion, interest payments alone exceed $1 trillion a year. America pays more in interest than it spends on defense. This is the same death spiral that Spain entered in the 1500s. And here's the really dark side of things. America is devaluing its currency, not by mixing copper with silver coins, by printing dollars. The Federal Reserve created $5 trillion during COVID, another $2 trillion for infrastructure, trillions more for bailouts and stimulus. Just like Spain did, they're creating money out of thin air. And just like in Spain, inflation is exploding. Your rent has gone up. Your grocery shopping is more expensive. Gasoline prices have doubled. Everything is more expensive because the value of dollars has fallen. Spain devalued its silver coins. America is devaluing its currency by printing money. Different method, same result. The destruction of the currency. Spain kept borrowing until no one would lend to them anymore. Interest rates reached 40%. Interest rates in America are also rising. The government is spending more and more money to pay off old debts. At some point, the accounts don't add up, just like in Spain. And here's what you need to understand. Spain didn't run out of silver. The mines continued to produce. Treasury fleets continued to arrive, yet they went bankrupt because they spent faster than they mined. They borrowed faster than they earned. They devalued their real wealth faster than they imported it. America's dollar won't run out. They can print it forever. But at some point, those dollars become worthless. Just like the Spanish copper coins became worthless. And when your currency loses value faster than you can print, you're in a death spiral, and there's no way out other than collapse. The Spanish Empire went from peak to insignificance in about 150 years. They peaked around 1580 under Philip II. By 1700, they were a second-rate power. France had overtaken them. England had overtaken them. The Dutch had built a much larger trading empire with 0 silver mines. Spain had all the gold and ended up with nothing. America peaked around 2000. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was the sole superpower. Now it's 2025. China is rising. American infrastructure is collapsing. The dollar's share of global reserves is decreasing. Other countries are trading with everything except the yuan, the euro, and the dollar. This pattern is recurring. And here's the terrifying thing. Spain saw this coming. Their advisors warned them. Economists wrote about this problem. Everyone knew spending was unsustainable, but they couldn't stop, because stopping meant cutting back on the army, ending wars, accepting decline. No king wants to be the one to admit the end of the empire. America is in the same situation. Everyone knows the Social Security system is underfunded. Everyone knows the debt is unsustainable. Everyone knows printing money causes inflation. But nobody wants to cut spending. Nobody wants to tell voters that Medicare might not exist in 20 years. Nobody wants to admit the end of the empire. So they will continue to print money. They will continue to borrow. They will continue to spend. Until one day, it doesn't work anymore. Just like Spain, treasury fleets came to Seville for 150 years. And then one day, Spain realized it had spent everything, and all that was left was debt and a ruined economy. If you're holding onto cash, you're making the same mistake the Spanish citizens made in 1580. They thought silver coins would always be valuable. They weren't. If you're relying on Social Security for retirement, you're making the same mistake the Spanish soldiers made. They thought the king would always pay them. He didn't. The richest empire in history went bankrupt because wealth isn't about how much gold you have. It's about production, innovation, real economic power. Spain stopped producing and started importing. America is doing the same thing. Production has moved to China. Technological innovation is now global. America's main exports are the dollar and military power. This isn't a sustainable economy. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Empires don't collapse because they run out of money. They collapse because they squander their money on things that don't produce wealth. Military spending, debt payments, bureaucracy. Spain had silver, Rome had gold, America has the dollar. All three are on the same path, heading towards the same end. If this helped you understand how empires collapse, do me a favor. Subscribe. Because I study financial patterns that repeat throughout history. These are things that aren't taught in schools, but determine your economic future. If this has changed your perspective on economics, click the like button. And what I really want to know is, comment below and tell me, do you think America can avoid Spain's fate, or are we already on the same path? I want to hear your thoughts. Because the more people who understand these patterns, the harder it becomes for governments to claim that everything is all right. Now you know something most people don't. You understand how the richest empire in history went bankrupt. And you see that it could happen again. See you in the next video. This story isn't over yet.